Abraham says, well, that's enough of that. So he goes to a battle and retrieves Lot. And that's going to help us understand a little bit about what's going on here with Lot's rescue. In verse 12 it says, they also took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. Then one who had escaped came and told Abram, the Hebrew, for he dwelt in Terebinth trees of Mamre of Amorite, a brother of Ishmael, the brother of Aner, and they were allies with Abram. Now when Abram heard that his brother had taken captive, he armed his 380, and let me just get this right, 318 trained servants who were born in his own house, and went and pursued as far as Dan. And so they go and they brought him back, verse 16, he brought him back all the goods, and also brought back his brother Lot and his goods, as well as all the women and the people. Now what we want to notice here is the introduction to Melchizedek. And so Abraham goes and retrieves Lot because he was taken captive. It's his nephew. And what we're going to be noticing in Hebrews chapter 7, for those who haven't been with us, there's going to be an analogy. That's all it is. The Hebrew writer is going to make an analogy that Jesus Christ is a lot like Melchizedek. Well, who's Melchizedek? Look at verse 18 of Genesis 14. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was the priest of the Most High, God of Most High. And he blessed him and said, blessed be Abram of God Most High, possessor of the heavens and the earth. And blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And he gave him a tithe of all. That's it. Okay? That's it. Now you have another reference made over in Psalm 110. So if you just turn over there quickly, and then we'll go to our main study today. But if we go to Psalm 110 in our Bibles, and we read, well, look at verse 1. Psalm 110 and verse 1. The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand till I make your enemies your footstool. The Lord shall send the rod of your strength out of Zion, rule in the midst of your enemies. Your people shall be volunteers in the day of your power, in the beauties of holiness from the womb of your morning. You have the dew of your youth. The Lord has sworn and will not relent. You are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. All right. So there is the prophecy concerning Christ. Now, let's go back, or ahead, to Hebrews, the 7th chapter now. Because what we read last week was the introduction of being told about this man named Melchizedek. We didn't read a lot. I got my pen here, and I'm going to get you guys to tell me everything you know about this man. Okay? So in Hebrews chapter 7, which we're studying right now, it says in verse 1, for this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, who met Abram returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him, to whom also Abraham gave a tenth part of all, first being translated king of righteousness, and then also king of Salem, meaning king of peace, without father and without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like the Son of God, remains a priest continually. Now consider how great this man was, to whom even a patriarch Abram gave a tenth of the spoils. And indeed those who are of the sons of Levi, who received the priesthood, have a commandment to receive tithes from the people according to the law, that is, from their brethren, though they have come from the loins of Abraham. But he whose genealogy is not derived from them received tithes from Abraham, and blessed him who had promises. Now beyond all contradiction, the lesser is blessed by the great, the better. Here mortal men receive tithes, but there he receives them of whom it is witnessed that he lives. Even Levi, who receives tithes, paid tithes through Abraham, so to speak, for he was still in the loins of his father when Melchizedek met him. We read that last week. All right. Let's clear up a lot of confusion, shall we? So, we're talking about a time when Abraham lived. Then, of course, Moses came on the scene, and he got the Ten Commandments. And how time was between these two? Abraham and Moses? 430 years. Okay? That'll be important a little bit later for those who are not familiar with this text. Of course, we've got Jesus dying, buried, and resurrected. This chapter is trying to help people to understand how much greater Jesus is than anyone, and the law that he has. So he introduces Abraham and Melchizedek. What do you know about this king Melchizedek? It said in the Bible. What do you know about him? I already gave you one. He's a king. What else do you know about him?
He's a high priest.
It's a priest. Okay. Of God. That's important. Okay. So appointed by God. What else do you know about him?
No genealogy.
No record.
No
No record of his genealogy, of his parents, right, or his death. Okay, so let's just dismiss a false notion right there. Does this mean he had no birthday? He had no death day? No, we're talking about there's no record of it. And that's why the Hebrew writer is going to use Melchizedek as an example to compare him like Jesus to show the superiority. Because what was the problem that these Jewish Christians were having? Mark, what was one of the problems that the Jewish Christians were having? We got Christians over here that the Hebrew writer is writing to, right? He's writing to Christians. But they were having a problem. What was their main problem? They want to go back under that old law. They want to emphasize the old law. They want to say, if you want to be a Christian, you have to keep the old law also. So what he's trying to do is to show, look, you need to see, you need to focus on Jesus here and his superiority. What do you think the significance is of introducing, there'll be a lot of reasons why he introduced Melchizedek, but why introduce Abraham? Why introduce him? Well, that's true, but Tony's before the old law. He's before the old law. Get that? They really have to get that. I mean, they even put pride on the fact of talking about Abraham as our father. Remember, Jesus had to deal with that. So, you say that we're sons of Abraham, and Jesus, well, I could raise up stones here. But the point is, they put a lot of emphasis on him. But the problem is, like a lot of religious people, is that they don't know how to what? They don't know how to connect the dots. Okay? When you connect the dots, you can learn a lot. And so if you just focus on the dots, you're not going to learn anything. Well, we know about him, we know about him, we know about him, we know about him. And they go over, but I'll tell you what, if you don't connect the dots, you're not going to see the picture. So the dot that we're trying to connect here is Abraham's introduced. Okay? And Abraham was before Moses. Matter of fact, we got Abraham paying tithes to Melchizedek. Dave, what were you going to say?
What year was that, where you got the A?
I have no idea.
It's approximate, right?
Yeah, I mean, we've got this approximate, you got the beginning of time, and then Abraham comes on the scene. You're looking at approximately 2,000 years, maybe 2,000 years beyond that point. Don't know exactly when Abraham came on the scene as far as date-wise. I don't have the date for Abraham. But we do know, are we guessing with this 430 years, by the way? Since we're talking about specifics, are we guessing about the 430?
No.
How do you know?
Says so.
Where?
In the Old Testament.
It actually mentions it in Galatians chapter 3, okay, in the New Testament. So he actually comes up and talks about the four, because Genesis chapter, or I won't say Genesis, but Galatians chapter 3, the same problem was existing, by the way. A lot of the New Testament writers had to deal with the problem that they were having of not wanting to stay just with the gospel. And so, coming back here, now this is important. The name was introduced earlier. Why was Levi mentioned in our reading in Hebrews chapter 7? Why was that brought up? Warren?
Well, I think it was because the Mosaic law was that all the priests had to come out of the tribe of Levi.
Okay.
Abraham had no connection with the tribe of Levi because such a thing in his day, right?
Okay, you're kind of on the right track there. And so you had the 12 sons, right, of Jacob, and one of them was Levi. And what was Levi's? How did they survive? The other tribes paid them tithes. The other 11 tribes paid them. They supported them, okay, because they had priestly duties. And they were actually helping the other 11 tribes, right, when they would come with their sacrifices and everything. Mark, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, I think, you know, you can tell me if I'm not wrong, I think the point we're trying to make here is that because Abraham gave tithes to Melchizedek, that subordinates the Levites to Melchizedek.
Yeah, that's exactly where I'm headed with this. Because once we establish the fact that Levi, okay, received tithes from the 11 brothers, Levi is actually paying tithes to Melchizedek. That's the point that he's making. Right? You get that? Through his loins. In other words, because this would be the lesser. He's the greater. We're paying him. We're doing that. And Abraham, because of that, whatever came from his loins, and we know all of this happened, came from him, that makes this priest greater than these. Okay? This priest, they're actually Levi who received tithes. They're paying tithes. So when you think about the rank, if you're going to look at it that way, which because we're trying to point to Jesus here, we're going to talk about the rank. Who's the lesser? Everybody from Abraham on, right? They're the lesser because he paid tithes to Melchizedek, this priest. Why would he bring that up? Why would he bring that up? Because he's trying to make the point is there's a lot of similarities between Jesus and Melchizedek, right? Brian.
I think where you're heading with this is that Jesus came in the same order as Melchizedek. So now he is the high priest of the new law, which we in turn show tithes to Jesus.
Well, in a sense, yes, that's right.
In a sense.
Showing that he's the greater. If we don't see, and that's what the Hebrew brother needed to understand, and what we need to understand today, if we don't see the superiority, the greatness of Christ, and you say, well, Chuck, do not all religious groups show the greatness of Jesus? Answer? Why not? Because Jesus has how much authority? All authority. Have religious groups supposedly elevated Jesus, but yet have gone back here and brought some of these old laws over? They're everywhere. They're everywhere. They've done that. Because they think it's okay that we can bring those laws over, and that's why you have so much written in the New Testament. I'm not going to get into all of that because he's going to talk about that when we get over to the 10th chapter of Hebrews. What we're just focusing on today is we have to get over this hump. The superiority of Jesus within all of this. And how he's doing that is let's talk about Melchizedek and see the comparisons that are there. And that was the order I wanted us to see. I want to make sure that we got all of this. Oh, and he also mentions the idea that he continues as a priest, so to speak. Why? Why would Melchizedek kind of continue as a priest? Because there's no record of what? There's no record of his end. That's all. There's no record of... The emphasis is not the greatness of Melchizedek, so to speak, as it is the greatness of Jesus. You're just going back and borrowing this story, using this story that, by the way, it's not coincidence it's found in the Bible. Even though there's not much mentioned about him. You know, Abraham bumps into him, you know, and pays him a tithe. He's a priest. He's a servant of God. And Abraham recognized that. Guess what? Let's do the same. Let's recognize Christ's priesthood. Let's recognize his greatness. Now, when you have all of that, you go back and start looking at these verses. And go, oh, now I see how it all comes together. Look what we just break it down slowly. Verse 1 and 2 is when he went in Hebrews chapter 7. He runs into Melchizedek. Verse 3, he was without father and without mother. We're not saying he didn't have father or mother and didn't have a genealogy. There was no record of it, which is a great tool to use to compare that to Jesus. Okay? Jesus doesn't have the beginning or the end. but was made like the Son of God and remains a priest continually. Him. He remains a priest continually in the sense where there's no record of it. Now what about these guys? Is that continuing? No, because there's record. They died, okay? And people would have to continue to replace them as time went by. Melchizedek, a little bit differently. Verse 4, now considering how great this man was, to whom even the patriarch Abraham gave a tenth of his spoils. Okay, Hebrew brethren, consider what a great man he must have been because of what Abraham did. And you can just see the Hebrew brethren, okay, I get your point. You know, that's what he's wanting, the light to go on. Let's connect the dots here. He says in verse 5, and indeed, those who are the sons of Levi, who received the priesthood, have a commandment to receive tithes from the people according to the law. So we didn't make that up. The other brothers supported. They received tithes, right? They received tithes, which was a command under the old law. That is, from their brethren, though they have come from the loins of Abraham. Verse 6. But he whose genealogy is not derived from them received tithes from Abraham and blessed him who had the promises. Abraham. Oh, that's interesting. Where did he come from? Oh, let me put it this way. According to what we just read, where did he not come from? What's that? Well, he didn't come from the loins of Abraham. Could he? No, that's like me running into my dad, you know. You're part of my... well, no, I was before you, Chuck. You know, like he's older than me, right? I mean, it's not going to be. There's a proper order. He came first and then me. And so when you're thinking about Melchizedek, he didn't come from the loins of Abraham, because if he came from the loins of Abraham, then Abraham would have been greater than him. I hope this isn't that complicated. Mark?
Well, I think the emphasis here is on the order of Melchizedek. And that Melchizedek's end is really irrelevant, because there's an order that God recognized, and Jesus is in that order.
That's it. That's it. And just, this isn't really that hard. We're just trying to put all the pieces here. I put all these dots on here for you guys to see. I know it isn't that hard for us because we're looking back and we already see it all. I get that. But you have to put yourself in the shoes of these brethren who are hearing this because of their struggles of wanting to go back under. But the same problem does exist today, because we try to get people to understand that we just follow Jesus. Well, we do too. Well, not really. Okay, and that's the point we're making. Not if you're going to go back and bring things over. You fail to understand that Jesus brought us the new law, which is called the gospel. That's what we're under today, and we can't bring things over. Go ahead, Mark.
I was going to say, I think that in our time, what is missed, people fail to understand, is that Jesus is the high priest, and we, each of us who are Christians, are priests.
Right.
We don't need a priesthood.
We don't.
An official, like a Levitical priesthood, because we can petition God, each of us, on our own, through Christ.
Right. It actually surprises people when you talk to them and mention to the fact that we are priests. 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 9, we are of that royal priesthood. All Christians are priests. Now, since we're on this subject, okay, because we got... Now, we know what those priests did. What do we do as priests? What's that? Think about the concept of the priest. What did the priest... You know, we have a lot of roles. You know, I'm a Christian. I'm a brother. You know, you say, well, because I'm a brother, do I go spread the gospel? No, I'm missing the point. The brother means that's my relationship to my brothers and sisters. What does the word priest, what did they do, Mark? What did they do?
Well, on the law of Moses, if a person was guilty of sin, they went to the priest, and the priest offered the sacrifice to God.
There it is. They offered the sacrifice. Now, New Testament. If we're all priests, what passage comes to mind? Over in Romans chapter 12, verse 1 and 2, that we present our bodies as a living sacrifice. So we're just like them. So I present myself as a living sacrifice. I don't have to go to somebody else. Like Mark was mentioning, we can go directly to the Father. Could any of these individuals of these other tribes go in and offer those sacrifices? They weren't allowed to go. Only the priests were allowed to do that. And so who can offer your sacrifices?
We can, us individually.
Can I offer them for you?
No.
No. See, individually, I can't do your work. That's important here. You know, it's almost like I can remember my dad one time, not religious, when he was alive. I was going to church service. He said, "Say one for me." What's he thinking? You know, like I'm going to get there through you. You know, say one for me. Well, yeah, I would say one for him all the time, that they would come around and obey the gospel, yes. But this idea of thinking that just by association, which again, you can see the Hebrew writer telling them, I know you're connected through Abraham. I know you've come through the loins of Abraham. However, Melchizedek didn't. He's the greater, and he's like Jesus. Okay, well, let's follow along. So he mentions, that was verse 5, by the way, right? That was verse 5 where he says, from their brethren, though they have come from the loins of Abraham. Verse 6, but he whose genealogy is not derived from them, get that, is not derived from them, received tithes from Abraham, and blessed him who had the promises. Now beyond all contradiction, the lesser is blessed by the greater. Blessed him. He's the greater. That's the point that he's trying to get along here. You know, you think of somebody that comes in and is not really familiar with the Bible. It's kind of a good lesson just to learn about how great Jesus is, because that's the point that he's trying to get across here. He says in verse 8, here mortal men receive tithes, but there he receives them, of whom it is witnessed that he lives. Okay, so Melchizedek is under consideration. Even Levi, who receives tithes, paid tithes through Abraham, so to speak. Okay, so they did. Abraham paid tithes, even though he received tithes. He's paying tithes through Abraham. The comparison needs to be made. For he was still in the loins of his father when Melchizedek met him. But we got to keep going. Okay, so we're through the verses we read last week. That brings us up. Now we got to get into this next section, 11 through 19, and see what the Hebrew writer continues to drive home now. Okay, where will we start reading? Let's start. Josh, let's start back with you. 2 verses apiece. We're going to go through verse 19, guys. Okay, 2 verses apiece.
Therefore, perfection were by the Levites priesthood. Under it, the people received the law. What further need was there that another priest should rise after the order of Melchizedek, and not be called after the order of Aaron? For the priesthood being charged, there is made a necessity, a charge also of the law.
He of whom these things are spoken pertaineth to another tribe, of which no man gave attendance at the altar. For it is evident that our Lord sprang out of Judah, of which tribe Moses spake nothing concerning priesthood.
And it is yet far more evident if, in the likeness of Melchizedek, there arises another priest, who has come from according to the law of a fleshly commandment, but according to the power of an endless life.
I'm sorry, what verse are we on?
Verse 17.
Okay.
For he testified, Thou art a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek, for there is verily a disannulling of the commandment going before the weakness of unprofitableness thereof.
For the law made nothing perfect. On the other hand, there is the bringing in of a better hope through which we draw near to God.
Wow. What a great passage. I mean, I love the way the Hebrew writer, I don't think I'm smart enough to be a lawyer, but I like what lawyers do, because lawyers, You know, and that's what we do when we're presenting the gospel. We take all the information and we give people the facts. And how do you argue? How do you argue against the facts? That's what we love about Christians, being a Christian, is that we give book, chapter, and verse. We give an answer for the hope that's within us. You know, people either accept it or they reject it. And that's the confidence that we have. And that's what I love about this book, because what the Hebrew writer does, he anticipates, and you're going to see this as we finish the book, is he anticipates, because it's just a letter. They're going to say, well, what about this? And what about this? And what about this? And he covers every aspect of what they might say, what they might be thinking. And you have it brought out here. Look at verse 11. It says, therefore, if perfection were through the Levitical priesthood, for under it the people received the law, what further need was there that another priest should rise according to the order of Melchizedek, and not be called according to the order of Aaron? Well, that's a good question. You know, if this law of Moses here, we've got this old law here that existed, this old law that existed from Moses to the time Jesus died, and Jesus brought a new law, of course, because you had to have the death of a testator. I have a will. It doesn't come into force until I die. Christ didn't come into force until he died. We understand that. So the Hebrew writer says, well, we're talking about Melchizedek. Why in the world would we need somebody to become a priest after the order of Melchizedek? If perfection were under the old law, why didn't we have somebody through Aaron? Again, the high priest. Why didn't we have that? If everything under the old law was going to make you perfect. Answer? It wasn't. Okay? He's just saying, well, no, you couldn't be justified by that old law. This is why Jesus needed to come, was the point that he's making. These people, the people that lived before the cross, they were looking forward to the Messiah coming. If the Messiah doesn't come, none of them make it either. Mark?
Well, and I think it bears worth pointing out that even that Levitical priesthood became corrupt.
Oh, yeah.
This time around. So it was flawed and could not function in the way that Jesus believed an everlasting priesthood would function.
That's why it was meant to be temporary, right? And the Lord knew that it was going to be temporary. So let's go back. Let's pick up where we left off in verse 11. So he left with that question. Well, why didn't we have a priesthood that would follow from Aaron of the tribe of Levi? Aaron's and his sons would become high priests. Jesus is our high priest. Why didn't we continue with that? Why did we have to go back and talk about somebody like this, Melchizedek? He says in verse 12, for the priesthood being changed, of necessity there's also a change of the law. Okay, guys. I'm preaching to you like the Hebrew writer is talking to the Hebrew brethren. So if you're the Hebrew brethren, I would be basically just saying to you, like he said right here, look, you're Christians, right? Yeah. Well, the priesthood has been changed. Okay. Well, don't bring things over, because if the priesthood has been changed, the law has been changed. Oh, right. That's a dot you want to connect it. You know, you want them to see that, well, I know the priesthood has changed. You know, I get that. Okay, because Jesus Christ came and we're not under that, but they still, you know, they're binding circumcision, they're binding things upon the people, they're trying to bring things over from the old law. It really bothers people when we tell them that the law has changed. Do you know why it bothers people? Think about it. Here's people claiming to be Christians today, and we're telling them, we're not under the Old Testament, the law has been changed. Why does that bother them, do you think? I know why it bothered me when I was a part of a religious group. Why do you think it bothers people? Mark, what do you think?
I mean, some people look to it for
Yeah, well, that's true. Why does it bother them that we would say the law has been changed? One of the things, guys, is that this law came from where? It came from God. Right? And so they're saying, well, did God make a mistake? Right? That's the mentality. It's like, if you're saying that we're not under this anymore, and if it wasn't perfect, like it said here, if it was perfect, we wouldn't need to do that. And by the way, he's going to use that same language in the next couple of chapters, by the way. There wouldn't be a new law. If you could be perfect under this, you wouldn't need a new law. Mark?
Well, in my mind, all of that, all of Judaism had one end, and that was Jesus Christ. All the things that happened, and it was spanned, I don't know what the total length of time was, but it was a great length of time that Judaism existed and was in effect. And once Jesus came on the scene, there was everything. There was a lineage that could prove exactly what God promised to Abraham that he would fulfill. And all of that was possible because of that framework of Judaism that preserved all of that, and the law was for the Jew in order to maintain order throughout the progression of time for the Jewish people until Christ came on the scene. And it was God's plan, even if you go back to Genesis, that through Abraham's seed all nations would be blessed. Under the law of Moses, the Jew was the only thing in question. So in order for that to happen, then Christ came on the scene, and now there's neither Greek nor Jew. And the promise to Abraham's been fulfilled.
Yeah, they don't like the fact that there should be no distinction. Nancy?
But it should, like he said before, it's a teaching tool. It's not something that it was going to last forever. It's something to teach you for what's coming.
Well, right, and again, we get back to this idea that this was all part of a big plan. Okay, it was a part of the plan of God, and the idea that Jesus Christ was coming and that this was temporary, this was to point to Jesus. God gave this law. Did he create something with a flaw? Well, he didn't. The law wasn't flawed. Man was flawed. Let's understand that. God told man, don't do things, and they went ahead and did it. Okay, so they transgressed. There's nothing wrong with the law. It's kind of like when you tell your kids, do this, do this, do this. When you come home and they don't do it, was there a flaw with your laws? No, there wasn't a flaw with your laws. Okay. The problem was with the kids, and they didn't listen. They didn't do what you wanted to do. Now, the law in and of itself didn't fix what they were told to do. You know, I've illustrated that many times. You know, it's like if Dan and Mallory get me to babysit the kids, and they said, feed them at 5 and put them to bed at 7. They come back home. They said, what happened? Well, we fed them at 6 and put them to bed at 8. My question is, with their laws, the 2 laws they gave me, could it fix what we did that was wrong? Couldn't fix it. It just identified it. It identified it. And so the purpose of this was to, you know, it was temporary. Christ was ultimately going to come. His blood was going to flow both ways. And if you didn't keep the old law, the blood of Christ doesn't help you. If you don't keep the gospel, the blood of Christ is not going to help you. And that's the point. It's not hard. What were you going to say, Misty?
I was just going to say it wasn't the law that was flawed. It was
right.
It was the free will of humans failing to do it.
That's right. And this law was not designed, by the way. This law wasn't designed, like Dan and Mallory says, you know, 5 and 7. Well, those laws are not designed to fix whatever you violate. Okay? This law wasn't designed to make everything right if you violated it. This law could help you get to Jesus. The point of the law was to point to Jesus and that you trust in him, or trust in the Messiah that was come. Keep the law, okay? Take the sacrifices to the priests. But I'm going to tell you something. When you offer those sacrifices to the, you know, gave those animals to the priests and they made those sacrifices, if Jesus doesn't come, those sacrifices won't accomplish a thing. That's what they needed to understand. Now they accomplished, by keeping that law, the blood helped them. Because they kept the law that they were under at that time. Even Jesus kept the old law. Jesus lived and died under the old law. And a lot of people don't understand that either. Jesus lived under the law of Moses. That's why he would tell people when he healed them of leprosy, go show yourself to the priest. Why? Because under the old law, you couldn't just be cured and go mingle with people. You had to be declared clean by the priest. Okay? So he kept the law. He lived and died under it. But once he died, we're under this new law. And that's the point that he's trying to drive home. Let's keep going here. It says in verse 12, for the priesthood being changed, necessity there also of a change in the law. Verse 13, for he of whom these things are spoken belongs to another tribe, from which no man has officiated at the altar. What? Yeah. Somebody else is going to become this priest. We're talking about Jesus, of course. There were 12 sons. Which one did Jesus come from? Judah. Oh, by the way, he says in verse 13 or 14, "For it is evident that our Lord arose from Judah, of which tribe Moses spoke nothing concerning the priesthood." I don't know if you've got that marked in your Bibles, but I told you guys many times, mark that verse 14, because that's the passage you want to turn to of arguing the silence of the Scriptures. Have you ever heard anybody say, well, it doesn't say you can't, when they want to defend something? Well, it doesn't say you can't. It doesn't say you can. Here's the passage. Well, how do you know somebody, how do you know somebody else couldn't serve as a priest? Because he says, well, because Moses didn't speak anything. He only spoke of Levi. Oh, you mean to tell me just because he didn't say Issachar couldn't, does that mean he couldn't? That's what he's saying. He couldn't. Just because he said Asher, the tribe of Asher, none of them could serve as priests, does that mean none of them could? Yeah, because he said nothing. So the silence is a powerful tool which people don't like to respect when it comes to Scripture. Misty?
In the Old Testament, when Saul did offer a sacrifice, he was condemned for it.
You condemned for it. Yeah, we're not saying you couldn't. Okay.
No,
but you would suffer for it. That's exactly right. That's a powerful point. And so we have this new priesthood by the order of Melchizedek, similarities, wanting them to see this. He goes on and mentions in verse 15, he brings up Melchizedek again, verse 15. And it is yet far more evident if in the likeness of Melchizedek there arises another priest who has come not according to the law of a fleshly commandment, but according to the power of an endless life. This had nothing to do with the law of Moses. In a sense, what he's saying is, we're not going to follow that with the priesthood coming through Levi. It's the point that he's making here. So it was evident that we needed somebody in the likeness of Melchizedek way back here, 430 years before the law was even given, and compare that to Melchizedek, because there was no beginning, there was no ending, and that's the point that he was just simply making. And then he mentions in verse 16, who has come not according to the law of the flesh. I already mentioned that. Verse 17, for he testifies, you are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. Where did we read that? Psalm 110, verse 4. Okay? Psalm 110 and verse 4. When we get into chapter 8, when he talks about the new law, he's going to quote from Jeremiah. Why pull these passages out of the Old Testament? Because they were talking about Jesus. This shouldn't be everything we talked about this morning, folks, to the Jews, we'd say, the Jewish Christians, this shouldn't be a surprise to you. It was prophesied about. It's talked about in the Old Testament. There was going to be somebody who was going to be a priest by the order of Melchizedek, and that was going to be Jesus. So connect that dot too. It was talked about. This shouldn't surprise you. And then we notice that even more in the 8th chapter when we get there. I mean, here's this long quote from Jeremiah that says we were going to have a new law. Why is it surprising you that there's going to be a new law when your prophet, who you hold up in high esteem, the Old Testament books, said it was going to happen? So can you guys tell me how come that dot was not connected? When you had they had the Old Testament books. They knew about the prophets. They knew about Jeremiah. And Jeremiah, and it's going to be a long quote we'll notice. I don't know if it's next week, maybe the week after. And Jeremiah quotes that there's going to become a new law. And now there is a new law. How come they couldn't connect the dot, Mark?
Well, there is a willing ignorance. It's the same thing that we experience in Christianity today. People just aren't willing to accept what God says about it.
Just did the first time.
Did you? I got too wrapped up. Sorry, Mark, I cut you off there.
That's okay.
What were you saying?
Well, I'm just saying it's just because they weren't willing to accept it.
Why? But why not?
It's not what they expect.
That's not what they want.
Okay, and then see, guys, I'm going to tell you something. When you study with somebody and you show them a verse that says it clear and plain, they go, I don't see it. What do you have to say to yourself? They don't see it. But why don't they see it? Because they don't want to see it. When you don't want to see the truth, you sit there and go all day, I don't see it. I don't get it. Go ahead.
Well, my experience has been the argument, or not argument, discussion always breaks down with that's your interpretation.
It is. That's exactly right. And couldn't you see them saying, well, that's your interpretation? Not my interpretation. You know, Peter says that Scripture isn't of any private interpretation. And so we can understand the truth alike, we should be, but when you put all the facts together, that's what a lawyer does, right? A lawyer presents all the facts. And then you decide what's right and what's wrong based on the facts. And I've told you that before. A jury, if I committed a crime and they have photos, they have a confession, they have the weapon, they have the prints, they've got that same movie. If they got all that and all the eyewitnesses, and there I am on video, and then somebody, a juror, goes, I don't think he did. Why would you say that with all the evidence? That you can still have people not want to believe it. It doesn't matter, guys. Let's understand something. Don't think just because you can provide an answer that people are going to believe it. Who is the master teacher?
Jesus.
Did anybody reject him? What did they end up doing to him? They killed him. They killed him. Did he not speak clearly enough? Did he make it too confusing? No, the truth is there for people to learn, but don't expect everybody to see it. I don't expect that. There are people that study, but I don't expect, I see. We're connecting the dots in a Bible study. I'll do that. I'm trying to connect the dots in a Bible study so the big picture is revealed. But if people don't want to see it, they're not going to. And so you need to prepare yourself for that and be aware of what causes people from not seeing it so we don't fall victim of closing our minds because we could be just as guilty. Right? I've learned enough and I'm not going to learn anymore. And that can happen to us. So he says in verse 18, for on the one hand there is an annulling of the former commandment. An annulling. What's an annulling?
Just cancel out.
Yeah, canceled out, done away with, okay? It's erased. Annulling of the former commandment because of its weakness and unprofitableness. Its weakness and unprofitableness. Why? Because under the old law, you couldn't have the forgiveness of sin until Jesus came. If you could, then keep it going. Keep it going. That's the point that he's making, that he's going to build on in the next few chapters. In verse 19, I got 30 seconds. For the law made nothing perfect. On the other hand, there is the bringing of a better hope through which we draw near to God. That couldn't make you perfect, but this could. Okay? That's the point. Everything's about Jesus. My time is gone. It's past 1:45. Anyways, thank you guys. I appreciate your comments. And we'll pick up there, Lord willing, next week.
Good.
Yeah,